The galaxy fears only two things, the old arena announcer whispered through the crackling speakers. A starving black hole, and a human who has stopped being afraid. The Imperial Arena of Kaler Prime vibrated beneath 70,000 roaring voices as blue fire spilled from the towering plasma pylons overhead. The air smelled like burnt metal, engine coolant, and rain trapped inside old stone. Princess Valara Thorn sat high above the crowd on her silver throne, one elegant leg crossed over the other, while cold violet light shimmered across her dark blue skin. Around her, nobles laughed behind crystal masks and raised glasses filled with glowing nectar imported from the outer moons. Below them, chained in the center of the arena floor, Ethan Hayes slowly lifted his head. A heavy shock collar circled his throat. Thick alloy restraints dug into his wrists. His torn black prison shirt clung to his broad frame, stained with dust and dried engine grease from the lower mining sectors. The giant holographic screens above the stadium flashed his designation in crimson letters. Human male. Deathworld, origin, Earth. Status, property. The crowd booed instantly. To most of the Empire, humans were little more than dangerous animals from a violent planet hidden at the edge of explored space. Cheap labor. Disposable fighters. Useful only when properly controlled. Valara watched him carefully from above, her silver hair moving softly in the artificial wind generated by the arena turbines. That one doesn't bow, she murmured. One of her royal guards lowered his head respectfully. The handlers have tried, Your Highness. He refuses conditioning. A faint smile touched her lips. Interesting. Ethan remained silent as the electronic chains pulled tighter. He had been in the arena for 3 months now. 3 months of public humiliation. 3 months of nobles betting on whether the human would finally break. Yet somehow, he never gave them what they wanted. No pleading. No rage. No fear. That silence unsettled them more than violence ever could. The arena gates behind him groaned open with hydraulic force. Steam rolled across the black sand floor. A massive creature emerged, slowly from the darkness beyond the gate. 8 feet tall, pale armored skin, for glowing eyes. The audience erupted in excitement. Ethan glanced toward the creature once, then back toward the royal balcony above him. Straight at Valara. The princess leaned forward slightly. Most slaves avoided eye contact with royalty. This human stared directly into her eyes like he had forgotten who she was. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Arrogant animal, one noble muttered nearby. Valara stood gracefully from her throne. The entire stadium quieted immediately. Even the music stopped. Her silver heels echoed against the polished metal stairs as she descended toward the arena floor surrounded by guards in white ceremonial armor. Ethan did not move. The creature behind him growled impatiently, scraping claws across the sand. Valara stopped only inches away from the chained human. Up close, she could see the faint scars crossing his jawline and neck. Old scars. Not from the arena. War scars. Look at you, she said softly, her voice carrying through hidden speakers across the entire stadium. The mighty humans of Earth. Reduced to pets. Some of the crowd laughed nervously. Ethan said nothing. Valara's eyes narrowed slightly. She hated silence during public games. She lifted one foot and shoved him backward against the chains with a sharp kick to his chest. Gasps rippled through the audience. Ethan stumbled one step, but did not fall. Then the arena lights flickered. A strange red glow slowly spread beneath the skin near Ethan's collarbone. Thin glowing lines. Like cracks inside cooling lava. One royal AI drone instantly descended from the ceiling. Warning, it announced mechanically. Unregistered Deathworld markers detected. The creature behind Ethan suddenly stopped growling. The entire arena became silent. Even the monster looked afraid. For 3 long seconds, nobody in the arena moved. The red glow beneath Ethan Hayes' skin pulsed softly under the dark fabric stretched across his chest, like embers buried beneath ash. Princess Valara stared at him without blinking. Around them, the nobles who had laughed moments earlier now whispered nervously behind jeweled masks. The ancient warning drone hovered closer to Ethan's face, scanning him again and again as if it could not believe the result. Biological classification uncertain, the machine repeated. Genetic markers match restricted war archives. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly. The glow faded just enough to disappear beneath his collar. "It is malfunctioning," one royal scientist said quickly from the upper balcony. His voice cracked despite the confidence he tried to project. "Humans are unstable, but primitive. There has never been a confirmed." The arena creature suddenly backed away. 70,000 spectators watched in stunned silence as the massive predator lowered its armored head and released a low, vibrating sound deep from its throat. Fear. The beast was afraid of the chained human standing in front of it. Ethan noticed it immediately. So did Veilira. Her violet eyes narrowed. "Interesting," she whispered again, though this time the word carried something new beneath it. Not amusement. Concern. The overhead lights dimmed briefly as the Empire's central archives connected to the arena systems. Massive holographic symbols flashed across the sky dome above the stadium. Warning: Deathworld Survivor Classification. Access restricted by Imperial decree. The audience erupted into confusion. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. That symbol. He had not seen it in years. Memories flickered through his mind like broken lights. Smoke rolling across frozen ground. Human soldiers standing silently in the snow. Red emergency flares reflecting in cracked visors. Then screaming alarms. Endless alarms. "Who are you?" Veilira asked quietly. Ethan looked at her again. There was no anger in his expression. No pride either. Just exhaustion. "Nobody important," he answered. His voice was rough from months in the mines beneath the arena. The princess studied him carefully. Most men spoke to her with fear or desperation. Ethan spoke like a man who no longer expected kindness from the universe. Before she could answer, a loud metallic crack echoed through the arena floor. One of the energy pylons along the outer wall exploded into sparks. The crowd gasped as the arena shields flickered unstable for a moment. The giant creature reacted instantly. Panic spread through its glowing eyes. It slammed backward into the damaged barrier, and another section of the force field failed with a violent burst of blue light. Guards rushed toward the lower gates. "Contain the beast," someone shouted. But the creature was no longer looking at the exits. It was staring directly at the royal platform above the arena floor. At Veilira. Ethan noticed the shift before anyone else did. He stepped forward automatically despite the chains still locked around his wrists. The movement made the guards raise their weapons immediately. "Stay where you are, human," one shouted. Ethan ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on the frightened animal trembling near the broken shield. "It is not hunting," he said calmly. "It is cornered." Another explosion thundered through the arena. The crowd began pushing toward the exits in panic. High above them, crystal chandeliers swayed violently from the ceiling supports. Veilira remained frozen where she stood, silver hair dancing in the hot wind rushing through the damaged pylons. Ethan glanced at her once, then at the terrified creature. Slowly, the red glow beneath his skin returned. The creature moved first, not toward the crowd, not toward the guards aiming shock rifles from the upper rails. It lunged toward the royal staircase where Princess Veilira stood surrounded by frozen nobles too terrified to run. Panic spread instantly through the arena. Crystal goblets shattered across the polished floors above. Expensive robes tangled as senators and merchants pushed toward emergency exits. The warning sirens grew louder until they sounded like metal screaming inside Ethan's skull. "Protect the princess," a commander yelled. But the royal guards hesitated. The beast was too large, too fast. Ethan felt the red glow spread farther beneath his skin, climbing slowly along his arms like living fire beneath flesh. Heat pulsed through his chest. His breathing deepened automatically. Old instincts. Buried instincts. The kind trained into men who survived worlds that tried to kill them before they could walk. One of the chains snapped, loose from the damaged arena pillar beside him. Sparks sprayed across the sand. Ethan barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the terrified animal charging toward Veilira. Because that was what it was. Terrified. Not evil. Not bloodthirsty. Just trapped. "Move," Ethan shouted. His voice cut through the chaos hard enough to freeze several guards in place. Veilira looked down toward him in shock. For the first time since entering the arena, she obeyed. She stepped back just as the creature slammed into the lower staircase, sending fragments of silver stone skidding across the floor. Noble screamed. Security drones descended from the ceiling in defensive formation, blue targeting beams sweeping across the beast's armored hide. Ethan moved before they could fire. "Do not shoot it," he roared. The command echoed across the arena. Even the drones paused for half a second. Ethan grabbed the loose chain dragging beside him and stepped directly between the creature and the royal platform. The glowing marks beneath his skin pulsed brighter now, casting faint crimson light across his jaw and throat. The animal stopped. Massive claws scraped against the black sand floor only 15 feet away from him. Steam curled from its nostrils into the cold arena air. Ethan slowly lowered his hands. "Easy," he said quietly. "Nobody here is trying to hurt you." Behind him, one noble let out a disbelieving laugh. "The human has lost his mind." Ethan ignored him. The creature's 4 glowing eyes locked onto the red symbols beneath Ethan's skin. Recognition. The realization hit Veilira instantly. "It knows what he is," she whispered. One of her royal scholars turned pale blue with fear. Impossible. Those markings were erased after the war. Another tremor shook the arena structure. Dust drifted from the ceiling supports high above them. Somewhere deep beneath the stadium, ancient engines groaned under pressure. Ethan kept his attention on the creature. Slowly, carefully, he knelt onto one knee in the sand. The movement shocked the audience into silence again. A human slave kneeling willingly. Not in surrender. In trust. "You are scared," Ethan said softly. "I get it." The creature tilted its massive head slightly. The red glow under Ethan's skin reflected in its dark eyes. Veilira stared at him from the staircase above, unable to look away. He should have hated her. She had humiliated him in front of the entire empire, treated him like an object. Yet here he was risking himself to stop the panic spreading through the arena. Not for glory, not for revenge, simply because others were afraid. The beast slowly lowered itself toward the ground. The entire stadium held its breath. Ethan reached out carefully and placed one hand against the side of its armored neck. Warm, trembling, alive. Then every light in the arena suddenly died. Darkness swallowed the arena so completely that the roaring crowd vanished in an instant. The only remaining light came from the faint crimson glow beneath Ethan Hayes' skin. Thin burning lines stretched across his arms and throat, pulsing softly like a heartbeat beneath the dark. Somewhere high above, frightened voices echoed through the shadows. Emergency alarms crackled over the damaged speaker system. Then came the sound that changed everything. Heavy steel doors locking automatically. Containment protocol activated, an artificial voice announced across the arena. All exits sealed until threat assessment is complete. Panic exploded through the stadium again. Nobles pounded against sealed gates while security drones scanned the darkness with pale blue search beams. Princess Veilira stood frozen halfway down the royal staircase, silver hair drifting in the cold air pouring from the damaged ventilation shafts. Her eyes never left Ethan. Neither did the creature's. The massive animal remained lowered beside him, trembling slightly beneath his hand like a storm trying not to break apart. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Easy," he whispered again. "You are all right." A spotlight suddenly flickered back to life overhead. White light poured directly onto Ethan and the creature beside him. Gasps spread through the audience. The glowing marks beneath Ethan's skin had spread farther now, crawling down his hands like streams of molten red beneath flesh. The Empire's ancient archive drone descended once more from the ceiling. This time, its metallic voice sounded different. Not confused. Afraid. Confirmed genetic identification, it announced. Human survival strain designation, Warborn. Silence crushed the arena. Even the nobles stopped shouting. Veilira felt cold despite the heat radiating from the damaged pylons around her. She had heard stories about warborn humans as a child. Every royal heir had. Monsters from Earth engineered during the border conflicts centuries ago. Soldiers capable of surviving radiation storms, frozen oceans, poisoned air, and psychological conditioning that shattered other species completely. The Empire had outlawed their creation after entire fleets vanished during the old wars. Most believed they no longer existed. Ethan slowly looked up toward the hovering drone. "Shut it down," he said quietly. The drone ignored him. "Warning. Warborn humans display heightened empathy suppression resistance and extreme survival adaptation. I said shut it down." The red glow beneath Ethan's skin pulsed brighter. Every nearby light flickered violently. The drone instantly powered off mid-sentence and crashed harmlessly into the sand. The entire stadium went silent again. Veolira's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Not because of what Ethan had done, because of how calm he remained afterward. No rage, no arrogance, just exhaustion. Ethan glanced down at the frightened creature beside him and slowly removed his hand from its neck. "You should not be here," he murmured to it. "Neither should I." The animal released a low sound deep from its chest before retreating slowly toward the shadows near the broken gate. It obeyed him. One royal commander finally found his voice. "Your Highness, step away from the human immediately." Veolira did not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on Ethan as he stood alone in the center of the darkened arena, chains hanging broken from his wrists. "Why did you protect me?" she asked softly. Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because you were scared," he answered. "That is usually enough." The simplicity of the reply struck her harder than any insult could have. Around them, frightened nobles whispered words like "weapon" and "monster" and "execute him now." Ethan heard every one of them, yet he only looked tired, like a man carrying something heavy for far too long. Another explosion echoed deep beneath the stadium floor, this one stronger than before. The entire arena trembled violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then the emergency system announced the words that made every face in the Empire turn pale. "Reactor breach detected beneath lower containment levels." Ethan's expression changed instantly. Not fear, recognition. He turned toward the lower tunnels beneath the arena and whispered one quiet sentence under his breath. "Oh no." The floor beneath the arena shuddered hard enough to knock several nobles to their knees. Emergency lights flashed crimson across the massive stadium, while thick smoke curled upward from the lower maintenance tunnels beneath the sand. Ethan Hayes stared toward the reactor corridors with an expression Princess Veolira had not expected to see on a so-called monster. Fear. Real fear. Not for himself. For everyone else. "What is happening down there?" Veolira asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. His glowing marks dimmed slightly beneath his skin as though his body itself were trying to stay calm. Around them, guards scrambled to restore order while terrified spectators pounded against the sealed exits. Somewhere above, children were crying. Ethan finally looked toward the princess. "Your arena is built over military containment chambers," he said quietly. One of the royal scholars stepped forward at once. "Impossible. Those tunnels were abandoned centuries ago." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, they were buried." Another tremor rolled through the stadium. This time the sound came with a deep metallic groan from somewhere below them, like giant doors slowly unlocking after decades underground. Veolira felt cold spread through her chest. "How do you know this?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated. The answer clearly hurt him. "Because humans built them." Silence followed instantly. Several nearby guards tightened their grip on their rifles. The old stories returned to everyone at once now. Human war engineers. Secret containment facilities. Experiments. Conducted during the border wars no empire officially admitted had happened. Ethan glanced toward the terrified crowd above them. "You need to evacuate this place now." One commander scoffed nervously. "And trust the word of a warborn?" Ethan ignored the insult completely. "Your reactor breach did not happen by accident," he continued. "Those old systems only activate when something wakes up." Veolira studied him carefully. He was no longer speaking like a slave, or even a soldier. He sounded like a man remembering a nightmare he wished had stayed buried forever. The princess stepped closer despite the warnings from her guards. "What wakes up?" Ethan looked directly into her eyes. "Things humans were never supposed to create." Before she could respond, the arena floor split open near the far wall with a thunderous crack. Dust exploded upward into the air. Spectators screamed as sections of black sand collapsed into darkness below. Emergency drones immediately flooded the opening with scanning beams. What they revealed made the entire arena fall silent again. A giant metal door. Ancient. Buried beneath layers of stone and sand. Thick human lettering stretched across its surface beneath faded warning symbols. Restricted bioweapon storage. Do not open. The old human language triggered something deep inside Ethan's memory. Snow. Sirens. White laboratory lights reflecting off frozen steel. Men shouting numbers through gas masks. He closed his eyes hard for half a second. "Ethan," Veolira said softly before realizing she had used his name for the first time. His eyes opened again. The red glow beneath his skin pulsed brighter in response to the sound of his name, spoken without hatred. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "If those containment levels fail, this entire city dies." The royal commanders immediately erupted into arguments. Some demanded Ethan be executed before he could sabotage the Empire further. Others wanted the arena evacuated immediately. Above them, frightened nobles pushed and screamed beneath flashing emergency lights. Through all the chaos, Ethan noticed something nobody else did. The creature from the arena pit had disappeared. His expression darkened instantly. "Where did it go?" he asked quietly. One guard pointed toward the broken containment tunnels below. Ethan muttered something under his breath that Veolyra could not fully hear. Then he stepped toward the collapsing lower corridors. "Wait," Veolyra called after him. Ethan paused. "If you know what is down there," she asked carefully, "why are you going toward it?" For the first time since entering the arena, something painful crossed Ethan's face. "Because if I do not," he said softly, "someone else will." The lower containment corridors smelled like rust, coolant, and ancient dust trapped underground for centuries. Red emergency lights pulsed slowly along the narrow metal walls as Ethan Hayes moved deeper beneath the arena with Princess Veolyra only a few steps behind him. Around them, frightened guards scanned every dark corner with trembling rifles, but Ethan could already tell most of them did not want to be here. Neither did he. The heavy blast doors above had sealed automatically minutes earlier, trapping thousands inside the stadium, while engineers desperately tried to stabilize the failing reactor core beneath the city. Every few seconds, the floor vibrated softly under their boots. Something below them was waking up. Veolyra studied Ethan carefully as he walked ahead through the flickering corridor lights. The glowing red marks beneath his skin had faded again, but not completely. Thin lines still shimmered faintly along his neck whenever the alarms sounded nearby. "You have been here before," she said quietly. Ethan did not stop walking. "Not this facility." His voice sounded distant. "But one like it." They passed another sealed blast door covered in faded human warning labels. Most of the Empire's guards could not read them, but Ethan slowed the moment he saw the old white lettering scratched across the steel. "Project Hollow Veil. Authorized personnel only." One guard frowned. "What does that mean?" Ethan stared at the words for several seconds before answering. "A mistake." Another tremor rolled through the corridor. Dust drifted from the ceiling vents overhead. Somewhere deeper underground, metal groaned loudly enough to echo through the tunnel like distant thunder. Several guards flinched. Ethan did not. He looked tired more than afraid now. Veolyra noticed it immediately. "You knew these places existed," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "Humans built weapons during the old wars that scared even us." The confession unsettled the corridor more than the alarms had. One young guard lowered his rifle slightly. "That is impossible. Humans are not advanced enough for—" "You mistake kindness for weakness," Ethan interrupted quietly. The guard fell silent at once. They continued deeper underground until they reached a massive circular chamber buried beneath layers of stone and old reactor pipes. Frost clung to the walls despite the heat from the failing systems nearby. Ancient human machines lined the room in complete silence, covered in dust thick enough to hide entire control panels. In the center stood a giant cryogenic vault, almost 40 feet tall. Cracked glass stretched across its surface like frozen lightning. Veolyra stepped closer slowly. What was stored here? Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the shattered cryo chamber. Empty. Whatever had been inside was gone. A low mechanical hum suddenly echoed through the chamber. One of the old terminals flickered weakly back to life. Static burst across a dusty monitor before an ancient recording appeared. The image quality was damaged, but the human scientist on screen looked exhausted beyond words. Snow whipped behind him through broken facility windows. "If anyone finds this," the man said through heavy static, "Project Hollow Veil has failed containment. The survivors are adapting faster than predicted." Ethan's face hardened instantly. Veolyra looked toward him. "Survivors?" The scientist continued speaking. "The Warborn were never meant to become permanent. We created them to survive impossible environments. But the modifications changed more than their bodies." The recording crackled violently. The empathy retention was unexpected. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Veilira noticed his hands shaking for the first time since entering the tunnels. "We taught them how to survive anything," the scientist whispered. "The problem is they still cared about people afterward." The recording suddenly ended. Silence filled the chamber again except for the soft hum of failing machines. Then one of the guards gasped quietly and pointed toward the far side of the room. Massive claw marks stretched across the frozen metal floor, leading deeper into the underground complex. Fresh claw marks. Ethan stared at them for one long second before whispering under his breath, "It found the lower labs." Veilira looked toward the darkness beyond the chamber entrance. "What exactly escaped from this place?" Ethan finally answered her honestly. "Something even humans were afraid of." The deeper levels beneath the arena felt colder with every step. Frost coated the metal walls now in pale white sheets, and each breath drifted visibly through the dim corridor lights. Princess Veilira walked beside Ethan Hayes in silence while the remaining guards followed several feet behind them, their earlier confidence completely gone. The claw marks carved into the floor continued forward through the old research sector, like scars left by something enormous moving through steel as if it were soft clay. Ethan kept staring at them with growing tension in his eyes. "You know exactly what made those," Veilira said quietly. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." "Then tell me." He slowed, near another sealed laboratory door covered in faded human warning symbols. One hand brushed lightly against the frozen metal as though remembering something painful buried beneath it. "During the border wars," he said carefully, "human colonies kept dying faster than we could protect them. Frozen planets, toxic storms, radiation oceans. Every world wanted us dead." The corridor lights flickered overhead. So Earth stopped trying to build better machines. Veilira listened closely. What did they build instead? Ethan looked down at the faint red glow still pulsing beneath his skin. People who could survive impossible places. One of the guards swallowed nervously. "The Warborn." Ethan nodded again. "Most of us were soldiers. But some projects went farther." His expression darkened. "Too far." Before anyone could ask another question, a distant metallic crash echoed somewhere ahead in the underground darkness. The sound rolled through the corridor like thunder trapped beneath the city. Several guards immediately raised their rifles. Ethan did not move. He simply closed his eyes briefly, listening. "It is injured," he said softly. Veilira stared at him. "How can you tell?" "Because it is trying not to scare us." The answer unsettled her more than she expected. They continued deeper until the corridor finally opened into a massive underground chamber larger than the arena above. Ancient cryogenic tanks towered nearly 3 stories high along the walls, many shattered from the inside. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like dead vines. At the center of the room stood a giant containment cradle surrounded by broken restraints the size of transport chains. Ethan stopped walking instantly. His entire body stiffened. The red marks beneath his skin flared brighter. Veilira noticed his breathing change. "Faster now." "Ethan," she whispered. He barely heard her. His eyes remained fixed on the old containment cradle where faded white letters were still visible beneath layers of frost. "Subject 0. The words seemed to drain all color from Ethan's face. One guard stepped closer to inspect the chamber. "What was Subject 0? Ethan answered without looking away from the cradle. "The first successful adaptation." Silence crushed the room. Veilira slowly realized what that meant. Not a machine. Not a weapon. A human. Suddenly the chamber lights powered on by themselves. Every frozen screen around the room flickered awake simultaneously. Static burst through the speakers overhead before an old human voice echoed across the underground facility. "Biometric recognition confirmed," the system announced. "Warborn genetic profile detected. Welcome back, Lieutenant Hayes." The guards immediately aimed their rifles at Ethan. Veilira stepped between them before they could react further. "Stand down," she ordered sharply. Ethan looked genuinely shaken for the first time since she had met him. "I was never supposed to come back here," he whispered. Then a soft sound echoed from the darkness beyond the containment cradle. Not a growl. Not a roar. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Alive. Frost drifted across the floor as a massive shadow moved behind the shattered cryogenic tanks at the far end of the chamber. The frightened guards backed away instantly. Ethan did not. He stared into the darkness with something close to grief in his eyes. "It remembers me," he said quietly. Veolyra looked toward the moving shadow. What is it? Ethan's answer came almost too softly to hear. The only thing that ever survived Earth worse than humans did. The breathing in the darkness grew louder. Slow. Heavy. Ancient. Frost curled across the chamber floor as the massive shape finally stepped into the pale emergency lights. Every guard immediately backed away. Even Princess Veolyra felt her breath catch in her throat. The creature stood nearly 12 feet tall, with thick gray skin layered like weathered stone. Its body carried old scars deeper than armor plating, and faint crimson lines glowed beneath its chest exactly like the marks beneath Ethan Hayes' skin. But its eyes were the strangest part. Not wild, not hateful, tired. Ethan stared at the giant being in complete silence. You know it, Veolyra whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. His designation was Atlas. One nervous guard raised his rifle. That thing is human. Partially, Ethan answered. He was the first adaptation trial. Atlas tilted his massive head slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice. The giant creature did not move aggressively. Instead, he took one slow step forward like someone afraid of frightening the people around him. The old containment chamber groaned softly beneath his weight. Veolyra noticed Ethan's hands shaking again. Not from fear. From memory. You served with him, she realized quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. When I was 16. The words settled heavily inside the frozen chamber. One guard looked horrified. They turned children into this. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. No, his voice dropped lower. They turned desperate survivors into weapons because Earth was dying. Silence followed. Atlas continued staring at Ethan with quiet recognition in his glowing eyes. Then the giant creature slowly lowered himself to one knee. The movement stunned everyone in the chamber. Ethan's face twisted with pain. Do not do that, he whispered. Atlas released a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the frozen laboratory like distant thunder. Veolyra realized with sudden shock that the creature was trying to communicate. Ethan stepped forward carefully. Atlas, he said softly, how long have you been awake? The creature raised one massive hand slowly and touched the cracked cryogenic cradle behind him. Then he pointed upward toward the city above. Protect, Atlas rumbled weakly. The single word echoed through the chamber speakers. Several guards stared in disbelief. Veolyra looked between the two humans in silence. Monsters, the Empire had called them. Yet the first thing this creature spoke about was protecting others. Another violent tremor suddenly shook the underground facility. Warning lights exploded across every wall. Critical reactor destabilization detected, the emergency system announced. Cascade failure imminent. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the lower reactor tunnels. The coolant systems are gone, he muttered. One engineer guard checked his scanner and turned pale blue instantly. If the reactor breaches, the entire arena district will collapse. Above them, faint vibrations from panicked crowds still echoed through the old ventilation shafts. Thousands of civilians remained trapped overhead. Veolyra looked toward Ethan. Can it be stopped? Ethan hesitated too long. Atlas answered first. Yes. His deep voice sounded strained, as though speaking itself caused pain. Ethan immediately shook his head. No, Atlas looked at him again. Only Warborn survive reactor core. Veolyra slowly understood. You mean someone has to enter the reactor chamber manually? Ethan looked away without answering. That silence was answer enough. The princess stepped closer to him. You already knew. Ethan finally met her eyes. The glowing red marks beneath his skin pulsed brighter now, reflecting against the frost-covered walls around them. Warborn were built for impossible environments, he said quietly. Radiation, pressure collapse, toxic exposure. Veolyra's chest tightened painfully. And survival. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. Most of the time. Atlas slowly rose back to his feet and stepped toward the reactor corridor entrance. Ethan immediately moved to block him. No, the giant creature stopped. Ethan's voice shook now for the first time. You already gave enough. Atlas looked down at him silently for several seconds before speaking one final sentence. So did you, little brother. The reactor chamber glowed like a dying star beneath the city of Kalar Prime. White steam poured through shattered coolant pipes, while warning sirens echoed endlessly across the underground facility. Ethan Hayes stood at the edge of the massive containment bridge beside Atlas and Princess Veolyra, as violent pulses of blue energy flashed deep inside the unstable core below them. Every vibration beneath their feet felt stronger now, closer to collapse. Engineers shouted through emergency comms overhead, their voices nearly drowned beneath the sound of overloaded machinery. Core temperature rising beyond containment. The system announced mechanically. Structural failure in 6 minutes. Veolyra looked toward the burning reactor pit and felt fear tighten in her chest. Not fear for herself, for the human standing beside her. Ethan stared silently into the unstable light reflecting across his scarred face. The red marks beneath his skin glowed brighter than ever now, tracing glowing patterns along his throat and arms like cracks in molten stone. Atlas stepped forward first. Ethan grabbed his arm instantly. No, the giant human looked down at him with tired understanding. You cannot survive this alone. Ethan's jaw tightened. Neither can you. Silence passed between them, the kind only brothers understand. Then Atlas slowly placed one massive hand against Ethan's shoulder. Little brother, he rumbled softly. We were not created to live easy lives. Ethan looked away for half a second. Veolyra saw the pain in his eyes immediately. All this time the Empire had feared humans because they survived impossible things. But nobody had ever asked what surviving had cost them. Another violent tremor shook the chamber hard, enough to crack sections of the bridge beneath their boots. The reactor light turned from blue to blinding white. 5 minutes, the system warned. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he looked toward Veolyra for the first time since entering the lower labs. Her silver hair drifted gently in the heat rolling off the reactor chamber, while emergency lights reflected across her violet eyes. You need to get everyone above ground, he said quietly. Now. Veolyra stepped closer instead. And you? Ethan gave the faintest smile. Tired. Human. I finally remembered what humans were actually built for. Before she could answer, Ethan reached down and unclipped the broken slave collar, still hanging loosely around his neck. The metal hit the bridge floor with a soft clang that echoed strangely loud inside the chamber. Veolyra stared at it silently. The symbol of everything her empire thought humans were. Property. Tools. Monsters. Ethan looked at the collar only once before stepping past it forever. Atlas moved beside him toward the reactor core. Together, the two warborn humans crossed the unstable bridge through waves of burning white light while alarms screamed around them. The guards watched in stunned silence. Nobody tried to stop them now. Veolyra felt something inside her breaking apart as she watched Ethan disappear deeper into the reactor chamber. Ethan, she called softly. He stopped halfway across the bridge and looked back at her one final time. The red glow beneath his skin illuminated his exhausted face against the darkness. You asked me once why I protected you, he said quietly. Veolyra could barely breathe. Ethan glanced upward toward the city above them, toward the thousands of frightened strangers trapped in the arena. This is why. Then he turned away and continued walking beside his brother into the light. Moments later, the reactor chamber erupted with a wave of blinding white energy, so bright the entire underground facility vanished beneath it. The shockwave rolled harmlessly upward through the city like warm wind before the reactor alarms suddenly stopped. Silence followed. Complete silence. Hours later, the sun rose over Kalar Prime for the first time. That morning, emergency crews filled the streets while frightened civilians slowly emerged from shelters across the arena district. Princess Veolyra stood alone on the highest balcony of the Imperial Palace, staring toward the distant stars above the waking city. In her hand rested the broken slave collar Ethan had removed before entering the reactor chamber. Cold metal. Empty. Behind her, nobles argued already about rebuilding the arena. About politics. About humans. Veolyra ignored every word. Because somewhere beyond those stars, she finally understood the truth her empire had feared for centuries. Humans were never terrifying because they could survive monsters. Humans were terrifying because after surviving them, they still chose kindness.